Hello, this week's readings had somewhat of an impact on my previous assumptions about ethical decision making. Before this, I had a pretty simple mental model, and that's basically that good people do good things and bad people do bad things. In order for a good person to do a bad thing, it would take something irrational, like emotions, dogma, or even love. I think that this can be applied to anything that obstructs logic. After going through these articles, I started to see that ethical decision making is more structural. It's shaped by culture, systems, and the environment that people are operating in. So instead of thinking of ethics as just a personal trait, I started thinking about it as an expanded system level outcome. So from the Jones and Liu article, there are two concepts that stood out to me. The first is the distinction between individualism and collectivism in this subject. In individualistic systems, decisions tend to emphasize personal responsibility and individual outcomes, whereas in collectivist systems, decisions are more influenced by group harmony and shared expectations. Second is the idea that ethical perception is shaped by social context. So people don't just apply a universal standard, they interpret situations differently depending on the environment that they're in. So what stood out to me here is that ethics are not static or absolute. Um, this supports my existing idea that ethics are relative and unfixed to the system that they're operating in. From my experience living in Korea and even more broadly in East Asia, there's a strong influence from Confucian ideals, such as things embedded in Confucian societies, like hierarchy, respect for authority, sometimes even blind, and maintaining harmony within the group. In those contexts, what is considered ethical can be relative. However, in Western contexts, challenging authority might be seen as ethical behavior, like speaking up could be construed as dissent in more collectivist or hierarchical contexts. That same behavior could be seen as disruptive or inappropriate. Each system defines dissent differently, and I think processes determine which is more ethical. The pros and cons of both depend on many variables. So ethics aren't just about what is objectively right, it's also about what the system allows, expects, and rewards. From Vriens and Achterberg, sorry, I think I butchered those names. There are two concepts that stood out to me. The first is that responsibility exists at both the process and outcome levels. So it's not just about whether the final decision is good, it's also about the decision making process. Second is that decision making tools and systems can either support or constrain ethical behavior. And it depends on whether they incorporate values, input, and accountability. This connects really strongly to how I think about systems. A lot of the time, unethical outcomes are not the result of someone intentionally doing something wrong. They emerge because the system itself is misaligned. Maybe it doesn't surface ethical considerations, or maybe accountability isn't clearly defined. The articles also emphasize that responsible decision making requires things like making values explicit and creating accountability in the process. And to me, these are critical because if a system doesn't force those things to happen, then even well-intentioned people can make unethical decisions and without realizing. So once again, it isn't about individual intention. So from a systems perspective, ethics aren't something you just have. They're something that emerge from how decisions are structured. From Flannery and May, there are two ideas that stood out to me. The first is that organizational context and external pressures heavily influence ethical decisions. So basically, in most workplaces, things like cost, speed, and deadlines end up mattering more than just doing the right thing. Not because people don't care, but because those things are easier to measure and the results are often visible right away. Ethical issues are harder to quantify and usually show up later. So over time, the system pushes people to focus on performance instead, and doing things right can be emphasized less. Across these three articles, there's a consistent pattern. It's that ethical decision making is shaped by cultural or societal context, system design, and organizational pressure. So instead of thinking of ethics as an individual trait, it behaves more like a system level output. Culture influences how people interpret situations. Systems influence what information is visible and how decisions are made. And organizational pressure influences what people are incentivized for prioritization. All of these concepts interact with each other. So from a human capital and systems perspective, this has important implications. Organizations often try to improve through training or policies, but based on this week's readings, that's not enough. Instead, organizations need to do things like design systems that make ethical considerations more visible. They need to structure decision processes to include multiple perspectives, and they need to align incentives so that ethical behavior is not penalized, but rather rewarded. From my experience working with systems and analytics, behavior tends to follow structure. For example, if a system rewards speed over accountability, people will optimize for speed. If a system ignores ethical signals, people will ignore them too. So ethics isn't something you can just tell people to follow. It has to be built into the system. So for me, ethical decision making is not just about having the will to do what's right. It's about designing systems where the right thing is obvious and multiple perspectives are considered, and where acting ethically is actually enabled and supported by the structure itself. So because of that, even rational, well-intentioned people can end up involuntarily making unethical decisions. So I started this idea that good people do good things and bad people do bad things, but now I'm thinking more along the lines of it depends on the system that they're in, because even good people can struggle to do the right thing if the system isn't set up for it. Thank you.